Jacob has been kicked out of the house by Isaac, and he now must go on a journey to find a wife in the land of Abraham's father. Genesis 29:1. Then Jacob went briskly and cheerfully on his way, 400 miles, and come to the land of the people of the east. Jacob, after having his vision that God bestowed upon him, was cheerful and happy. All of his worries, all of his fears, all of his anxieties, he threw them out the window and he decided to trust in God because God would be with him. 400 miles is an absurdly long journey. Like that would be days or weeks or maybe even a couple months. So it's a very long journey. Genesis 29:2. As he looked, he saw a well in the field, and behold, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it. Genesis 29:2. As he looked, he saw a well in the field, and behold, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it. For out of that well the flocks were watered. The stone on the well's mouth was a big one. 29:3. And when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the well's mouth, water the sheep, and replace the stone on the well's mouth. There we go. He sees this lovely well out there, a bunch of sheep hanging out around it. And the shepherds, they take this rock. There's a rock on the top of the well. So they take the rock off. Then the sheep are able to drink from the well. And then when they're done drinking, they put the rock back on. They roll the stone on top of the well. This is a way of protecting the well so that other animals don't come there and drain the well, or different pests get in there. You don't want stagnant water and have a whole bunch of mosquitoes going around, so maybe there's some sort of dynamic that way as well. But Jacob sees this. Genesis 29:4. And Jacob said to them, "My brothers, where are you from?" And they said, "We are from Haran." So Jacob's been on this long journey and he's finally encountered a group of people. Maybe he's encountered other groups before this, but he sees these shepherds or whatever, asks them where they're from, and they say Haran. And as we recall, that's kind of where he's supposed to be heading to. So this is good to see. Genesis 29:5. Jacob said to them, "Do you know Laban, the grandson of Nahor?" And they said, "We know him." This is great. Jacob's been on this long journey, and now it looks like he is in the right area. 29:6. He said to them, "Is it well with him?" And they said, "He is doing well. And behold, here comes his daughter Rachel with his sheep." So he's making small talk, asking how he's doing. You know, he's been on this journey to meet this guy or whatever. And then there's the guy's daughter showing up with some sheep. And it says 29:7. He said, "The sun is still high. It is a long time yet before the flocks need to be gathered in their folds. Why not water the sheep and return them to their pasture?" Genesis 29:8. But they said, "We cannot until all the flocks are gathered together. Then the shepherds roll the stone from the well's mouth, and we will water the sheep." So it looks like they're gathering all the sheep together, then they're going to water them all at the same time. And the mechanics is that they have to move the rock, roll the rock to get the well exposed for the sheep to drink. Okay, that makes sense. So they all gather together to do this. Genesis 29:9. When he was still talking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was the shepherd of them. 29:10. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his uncle, Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of his uncle Laban. So we got Jacob. He's been traveling for quite a while, meets these guys who are going to water their sheep, asks them what's going on about Laban, sees this girl, she's bringing her sheep to get water, and he is the gentleman. He walks over there, he moves that stone so the sheep are able to water. And talk about ways to make a good first impression, right? Genesis 29:11. Then Jacob kissed Rachel, and he wept aloud. 29:12. Jacob told Rachel he was her father's relative, Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. I'm sure the reaction to Rachel is probably pretty intense. She's just there with the sheep, getting them some water, and meets this stranger, this man, who kisses her, says he's her relative, and she runs home to tell her dad what's going on. I'm sure they didn't get very many visitors back then. Genesis 29:13. When Laban heard of the arrival of Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him and embraced and kissed him and brought him to his house. And Jacob told Laban all these things. I think for Laban, who loved his sister and really didn't want her to go, they wanted her to kind of stay for another week and, have some time to set up for her to go away. I'm sure he really missed his sister. And having his sister's son come, he was probably as excited as it would have been as if it was her, right? Almost a reunion by proxy. Of course, in the follow-up, we see that Jacob has told Laban all these things. So he probably told him everything that kind of has happened, him and his brother and his dad, and all this stuff that's kind of gone on in probably his life. He was going to dwell with them for a while, and I'm sure they got to hear all of his stories, all the stories of Jacob. Whether or not he told them about the vision or not, I guess we'll find out about that. I don't know if he would, but we'll see. It's already written here, so we'll have to get there. But I would not be surprised if he didn't say anything. Genesis 29:14. Then Laban said to him, surely you are my bone and my flesh. And Jacob stayed with him a month. I guess it was in this month he was there. They probably talked quite a bit and all that other stuff probably happened. Genesis 29:15. Then Laban said to Jacob, just because you are my relative, you should work for me for nothing. Tell me, what shall your wages be? So I'm sure in this month that he's been there, telling them the stories of where he's been and whatever, he was probably helping out around the farm. He was helping Rachel water the sheep or whatever on the first day without even introducing himself, or introducing himself after, I guess. So he's probably been helpful. He's been there with the house the last month, and he was probably helping out around, and he's like, well, what are your wages? We need to pay you for helping. Genesis 29:16. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. 29:17. Leah's eyes were weak and dull looking, but Rachel was beautiful and attractive. 29:18. And Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, I will work for you for 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. So they're in the process of negotiating the terms of the wages. And they've come to the conclusion of 7 years. 7 years will Jacob labor for the younger daughter, Rachel. There's also an older daughter, Leah, and she's going to come up in a little bit. Genesis 29:19. And Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than another man. Stay and live with me. So he likes the terms of this deal, and he thinks it's better for her to be with Jacob and then with some other guy from some other grouping or whatever, that, he really likes Jacob. So then we have a little bit of a time skip here. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him to be but a few days because of the love he had for her. So the time passed by really quickly because he loved her, and 7 years went by. So here we are, time skip. Genesis 29:21. Finally Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my time is completed, so that I may take her to me. So Jacob's like, well, I've done the work. Now it's your end of the bargain. Grant me my wife. It's time for the big party. Genesis 29:22. And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast with drinking. So here we go. We're having the ritual going on here. We're having the great big party. And of course, there's probably some alcohol involved. I'm sure Jacob had a few drinks at this point in time, maybe even more than a few drinks. Genesis 29:23. But when night came, he took Leah, his daughter, and brought her to Jacob, who had intercourse with her. Well, that is a pretty explicit verse in the Bible. I think the Amplified Version makes it sound even more extreme than the King James did. So anyway, we got Laban here. He brings down his daughter to Jacob, but he doesn't bring Rachel. He brings Leah down, Leah the firstborn. Uh-oh. Genesis 29:24. And Laban gave Zippan, his maid, to his daughter Leah to be her maid. So there we go. Now that Leah is out of his house and is now with Jacob, he sends a maid to help her with whatever it is that maids help with, and look after her, do whatever. Genesis 29:25. But in the morning, Jacob saw his wife, and behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, what is this that you have done to me? Did I not work for you all those 7 years for Rachel? Why then have you deceived and cheated and thrown me down like this? Well, I think that is a perfectly valid and understandable thing to ask. And I'm sure he's quite shocked, quite bamboozled, and just blown away with the circumstance that he is in. For in his actions and his relation with her, I mean, the deal's kind of done. You can't go back on this. There is no return policy. You can't, reject the delivery and send it back to the sender. This is over. It is done. Genesis 29:26. And Laban said, it is not permitted in our country to give the younger in marriage before the elder. I do wonder here, as if those are actual rules or if he's just saying that. That seems like an interesting government system or rule or regulation in the land, that you can't give away the younger before the elder. Or if it's just that, I don't know. There's just questions about how that's going down. But I mean, it kind of makes sense. You want to get the older out before the younger. Whether or not that's some sort of rule or law of the land that he's actually following it, or if he just wanted to make sure that she went to a good home. Some way of looking after her, for he loved his daughter. Or is this a more devious plan to get even more labor out of Jacob? Genesis 29:27. Finish the wedding feast week for Leah. Then we will give you Rachel also, and you shall work for me yet 7 more years in return. Well, there we go. Another 7 years and he can have the second daughter. What a deal. But first, the party must continue. Genesis 29:28. So Jacob completed and fulfilled Leah's week. Then Laban gave him Rachel his daughter as his wife. Genesis 29:29. And Laban gave Bilhah his maid to Rachel his daughter to be her maid. So Rachel is getting a maid as well. Genesis 29:30. And Jacob lived with Rachel also as his wife, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served Laban another 7 years for her. Well, at least this time he got his prize before doing the labor. So he's got his 2 wives, and he's working for Laban. He's got 7 years to work. I guess everything is kind of fantastic in that way, other than the whole thing that he loves his one wife and doesn't really love the other one, which is not a good thing. Polygamy is not good. Genesis 29:31. And when the Lord saw that Leah was despised, he made her able to bear children, but Rebekah was barren. So God saw the pain of Leah. He saw that Jacob, who is probably this wonderful, cool dude, married her and just didn't have any love for her. She was just someone by circumstance was married to him, not due to a choice on her part, and not even a choice on his part either, that her dad just kind of threw her into the mix, threw her into the wolves, so to speak. And God saw her pain, her suffering, in that she was in a marriage where she was not loved and she was not appreciated. So his intervention was to allow her to bear children, but to close the womb of Rachel, her younger sister, that she was unable to. Genesis 29:32. And Leah became pregnant and bore a son, and named him Reuben, see, a son. For she said, because the Lord has seen my humiliation and affliction, now my husband will love me. This is very tragic and sad. Although I guess it is a glorious thing to have this son, to have Reuben, but to think that that's going to change her husband into loving her, that he's going to appreciate her and show her the proper affection that she really deserves as the wife. Oh, man. Genesis 29:33. Leah became pregnant again and bore a son and said, because the Lord heard that I am despised, he hath given me this son also. And she named him Simeon. God hears. 29:34. And she became pregnant again and bore a son and said, now this time will my husband be a companion to me, for I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore he was named Levi, meaning companion. This is brutal. She's having all these kids, all these wonderful children are born unto her. And she just wants the love and respect of her husband, and he's just not interested. It's just the saddest thing imaginable. And she has another kid, and it's just like, well, maybe this time it'll be different. Maybe this time he will love me and be a companion. You can really hear the sorrow and the lament of her as she's going through all this. And childbearing in those days, it wasn't the wonderful trip to the hospital where they give you lots of cool drugs like modern days. This was a much darker time, and pregnancy was fought with a lot of risk and pain and suffering. So she's going through all this pain, all this suffering, bringing these, sons into the world. And her husband just doesn't seem to love her. She's just married to him by circumstance and not. Genesis 29:35. And she conceived and bore a son, and she said, now will I praise the Lord. So she called his name Judah, meaning praise. Then for a time she ceased bearing. So we have 4 sons now. We have Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Those names sound familiar, don't they? Quite a few years have passed in this chapter here, and we get to see a lot of growth and development as far as Jacob is concerned. Jacob was forced to leave his father's house because his brother was going to kill him, and he had to go on a long journey to this place, this Haran. And he's managed to make his way there. He's managed to find employment and a place of dwelling, somewhere to live, and has managed to get married, and now he has 4 sons. So he's really getting quite developed that way. But he can't dwell here forever. He has to go back at some point, or he needs to go back into the promised land. We'll see that happen later, but some more of these shenanigans have to be kind of figured out beforehand. That situation with him and his first wife, Leah, needs to be resolved. There needs to be something to kind of fix that, and we'll see what happens in the next chapter. God's going to intervene and try to improve things so that, she's not so miserable, and Rachel as well. She can't bear children, so something needs to be done there as well. So there's a whole lot more going on for our boy here, Jacob. And we'll get to see that in the next chapter, and probably maybe a couple of chapters actually. So that's kind of cool. Either way, we are at the end of the chapter, but we're not at the end of the story.